Hello and welcome to my channel Crafting with Shuttermonkey. I'm Amanda, also known as Shuttermonkey, and today I would like to share a sock tutorial with you. In this video tutorial I'd like to show you the techniques that I use to knit good fitting socks, not only for myself but for all my family too. You won't need any fancy sock rulers or knitting gadgets. The only equipment that you will need to measure a foot are a piece of paper, a pen or a pencil, an inch tape and a ruler. Once you've acquired your unique measurements and after you knit a tension swatch, you can then calculate how many stitches you need to cast on to knit a great fitting pair of socks. The techniques that I am going to show you in this video are the ones that I use to measure my own feet and also my family's feet. It even works when knitting teensy tiny socks for toddlers too. Just before we start, one thing I'd like to point out is that you should check your inch tape against a ruler, as sometimes these plastic inch tapes can stretch out of shape over time and give you an inaccurate measurement. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about today is the anatomy of a sock. This sock here I have knitted in 7 different colours of drops Nepal. I started on the cuff, and for this cuff I've knitted a 2x2 rib. Now you don't have to knit a 2x2 rib, you can have a 1x1 rib, you can also have a twisted rib, or you can have some pattern in your rib, or you can have a picot edge along the top. It's your rib and you can knit it however you like. One thing to keep in mind is that if you knit a twisted rib on your cuff, it's going to slightly tighten in your cuff, which is something you may not want if you suffer from circulation problems or diabetes. So we started here and knitted the cuff, and then we move on to the leg. This leg here is just knitted in stocking stitch, so it was just worked round and round in circles using knit stitch on my double pointed needles. Once I knitted the leg of my sock, I moved on to the heel flap. This sock has a traditional heel flap in Gusset, so you knit your heel flap first before moving on to the heel turn. That's the part in the dark blue, and then you pick up your stitches along the side of the heel flap before moving on to your gusset decreases. Then working the foot down onto the toe, and that's your sock finished. This is one of the easiest socks that you can knit, and I actually have a pattern here that's available as a free download. This sock here is my Swatch cuff down pattern. I use Drops Fable to knit this sock, and it gives you these lovely stripes. And again, I've knitted my heel flap, worked my gusset decreases, worked the foot, and then also worked my toe. And this is the colour here that I use for my contrasting cuff, heel and toe. This pattern here is a cuff down sock with a traditional heel flap and gusset. But if you would prefer to knit a toe up sock, I also have this pattern here. This sock here is called Swatch Toe Up. When you see these two socks together, you can see that they are very, very similar, almost identical apart from different colours. Both socks have a 1x1 cuff, they both have a stocking stitch leg, they both have a traditional heel flap, and then they both have the heel turn. They both have the gusset, one is gusset increases, one is decreases, moving on to the foot, and they both have a rounded wedge toe. But the main difference between these two socks is this sock is worked cuff down, whereas this sock was worked from the toe up to the cuff. This one is a free pattern, the Swatch cuff down version, but this one here is a paid for pattern, Swatch toe up. So that's my two Swatch sock patterns, and this one here again was knitted using some Drops Fable yarn to give you those lovely stripes. I'm now going to show you how to measure your foot so that you can adapt your sock to give a better fit. First, you need to stand on a piece of paper, making sure that you put your full weight on that foot, and then draw an outline of your foot. Try to keep your pen or pencil straight up and down, because if it tilts inwards the outline will be too small, whereas if it tips the other way the outline will be too big. So try to keep your pencil or pen straight up and down. And here you can see me drawing around my own foot. Now the next thing I would do is mark a line along the bottom of my foot. As you can see, my foot is straight up and down on this piece of paper, and I'm marking my line parallel to the bottom of the paper. And I do the same at the top of my foot, marking where the tip of my toe is. And I'm now going to measure the distance between those two lines. And as you can see, my foot is 10 inches long, and I'm just going to take a little note of that measurement. The next thing you need to do is take an inch off of that measurement. You need to introduce a little bit of negative ease into your sock. So my final measurement would be 9 inches in length when I knit my own socks. If you're knitting a sock for a child, you would only take half an inch off of this measurement. The reason that we introduce a bit of negative ease into our socks is because sock yarn is full of natural fibres and wool fibres, which tends to stretch as you wear the sock. Once you wash them, they do shrink back in, but your sock will stretch as you're wearing it, so you do need to introduce that negative ease. The next thing to do is to measure around the widest part of your foot. So you need to measure the circumference of your foot, and again, like last time, make sure that you have your full weight on that foot, as this can affect the measurement. One thing to keep in mind is that these flexible measuring tapes can stretch out of shape over time, so just check it against a proper ruler every now and again. And you can see here that my foot is 9 inches in circumference. But again, we take an inch off of this measurement, so when I come to knitting my socks, I knit a sock at an 8-inch circumference. Again, if you're knitting these socks for a child, only take half an inch off the circumference. So now I know that the circumference of my foot is 8 inches, and I know that that's usually the size for a medium-sized sock, and a medium-sized sock is normally 64 stitches. One important thing to note at this stage is that you should do this for both feet. There's a good chance that your feet aren't exactly the same size, and that one of your feet will be slightly longer than the other, or one will be slightly wider, so it's always good to check both feet. So the next thing that we need to do is to knit a tension swatch. This is just a regular tension swatch knitted using 6-ply yarn. You can use a tension square checker to help you count the number of stitches and the number of rows in 4 inches, which is 10 centimetres. But if you don't have one of those, just use your inch tape or else a ruler to check the tension. This first tension swatch is the way you would knit a swatch when you're knitting flat. But when you're knitting socks, you're knitting in the round, and you have to knit your tension swatch in the round too. When you knit a regular tension swatch, it's knit 1 row, purl 1 row, and I've also added a garter stitch edge around the border just to help it lie flat. And this is how you knit a traditional tension swatch, but when it comes to knitting the swatch for socks, you have to knit every row. Because you're knitting in the round, you have to knit every row, and there are no purl rounds involved. You're going to knit every round, and you're going to have a strand across the back to take you to the beginning of the round again. And that's the way to knit a tension swatch for your socks. You knit every round and you have all these strands along the back. This first tension swatch was knitted flat, knit rows and purl rows. The sock tension swatch is knitted in the round with every row knit. It's really important that you check your tension for your socks by knitting your swatch in the round, because when you're omitting those purl rows, it can adjust your tension. And again, you would just use your tension square checker to count the number of stitches and the number of rows, or you can use a ruler. One last important thing to remember is that you should always block your tension swatches before you measure them. You are aiming for a tension of 8 stitches per inch, but if, for example, you had fewer stitches, say 7 stitches in an inch, you would need to use a smaller needle size. And if you had 9 stitches or more per inch, you would need to go up a needle size and re-swatch. Most sock patterns are designed with a tension of 8 stitches per inch. Now that you know the circumference of your foot and you have checked your tension, you can work out how many stitches you need for your sock to fit. My tension swatch showed that I knit 32 stitches in 4 inches, so that's 8 stitches per inch. The circumference of my foot is 8 inches, And because I knit 8 stitches in an inch, that means I need to knit 64 stitches in the round to get my sock to fit. And if you just use a ruler to check this, you can see that my sock is measuring 4 inches across right now, which means it has an 8-inch circumference. When you come to the foot of your sock, which just as a reminder is the yellow part here, you need to knit enough rounds to accommodate the length of your foot. Most patterns tell you to knit the foot until your sock is a certain amount shorter than your actual foot. So, for example, my Scoosh cuff down pattern tells you to knit the foot until the length of your sock is 1.5 inches less than the length of your foot. Because my foot is 9 inches, I would knit until my sock is 7.5 inches long before starting the toe. So, to summarise, the most important things to remember are: measure your foot, check your tension, use this information to work out the size of the sock you require, and off you go. I hope you found this tutorial useful and it helps you to knit better fitting socks. Thanks for watching.